It's February 10th, 2024. I'm Alan Zundell, and welcome once again to Political Dharma. On today's show, I'm going to be giving you some more information about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s conversations with the Libertarian Party. I'll tell you about the Biden campaign's plans to target independent and third-party candidates in this upcoming election. Also, my take on the results of the major party primaries and caucus this week. And then finally, what I took away from listening to the arguments before the U.S. Supreme Court in the Colorado case barring Donald Trump from their primary ballot. I'll start once again with Robert F. Kennedy, as I often do. 2 weeks ago, Kennedy made news on the Michael Smerconish show on CNN by saying he was considering pursuing the nomination of the Libertarian Party. The Libertarian Party is the largest minor party in the United States, and in the last two presidential elections has gotten its candidate on the ballot in all 50 states. I reported that story on the same day that the interview aired, and a couple of my viewers wrote comments on the video saying they were surprised to hear about that possibility. Well, I wasn't surprised when I heard about it because I did remember having heard that Kennedy was in talks with the Libertarian Party previously. This week, I tracked down an earlier report posted on the New York Times website on September 23rd, saying that Kennedy had had talks with party officials as early as last July, when he was still running as a candidate for the Democratic Party nomination. The article by Nicholas Nehamas is entitled, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Flirts with the Libertarian Party. There were a few interesting tidbits of information in that article. For example, it says that last June, Kennedy was interviewed by the Libertarian magazine Reason and said that he has, quote, always been aligned with the Libertarians on most issues, end quote, but that he disagreed with them on issues like environmental protection, abortion, and civil rights. I take this to mean that these are areas that Kennedy would allow more government intervention than libertarians generally would. And in July, Kennedy attended Freedom Fest, a libertarian convention in Memphis, where he had a nearly hour-long meeting with Angela McArdle, the chair of the Libertarian Party. He also spoke separately at the convention with other libertarian leaders. In an interview for the New York Times article, McArdle said that Kennedy told her that he, quote, considered himself very libertarian, end quote, especially on issues such as the threat of the deep state and the need for populist messaging. The article also reported that Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico and the Libertarian Party presidential candidate in both 2012 and 2016, said that if Kennedy became their nominee, he'd, quote, vote for him in a heartbeat because he's not Biden and he's not Trump, end quote. Well, of course, there's no arguing that he's not Biden and he's not Trump. But what this article shows is that Kennedy is in alignment with the Libertarian Party, particularly on the issue of the, quote, deep state, end quote, primarily meaning the national government bureaucracy and its ties with the lobbyists for big corporations. It also shows that prominent libertarians are open to considering Kennedy's nomination. So what are the central beliefs of libertarians? Libertarians emphasize the value of individual freedom, including the right to engage in free market relations, and want a very limited government. As the preamble to the Libertarian Party platform states, they seek a world, quote, where individuals are free to follow their own dreams in their own ways without interference from government or any authoritarian power, end quote. Of course, just about all Americans believe in individual freedom and limited government, but the question is how much they would limit the government. I don't think Kennedy holds the libertarian philosophy because he's much more willing to use the government to regulate areas like the environment or abortion, but clearly he agrees with them that currently the U.S. national government has too much power and has been captured by big corporate interests. The party's nominee will be chosen at its national convention, which is scheduled for Washington, D.C. on Memorial Day weekend, May 24th through the 26th. Delegates chosen by their state parties to go to the national convention are not bound to particular candidates, at least according to Wikipedia. That means that they can vote for any candidate they want at the convention, opening the way for a possible RFK nomination. Whether the more ideologically committed libertarians will find his views acceptable enough is an open question. The party would certainly benefit from having a named candidate as its presidential nominee, as this would help them grow the party and retain ballot access for the next election cycle. And Kennedy would benefit from being able to get his name on the ballot across the nation a little more easily than gathering signatures as an independent candidate, although I think he would keep running as an independent even if he gains the nomination of the Libertarian Party. You can get your name under both. So a marriage of convenience looks like a real possibility here. I also have an update on the California State Party Convention, which is coming up in a few weeks. According to Richard Winger's Ballot Access News, which is an invaluable resource on these matters in case you want to look it up on the web, not only will RFK and independent candidate Cornel West be speakers at that convention, as I reported in previous episodes, but Jill Stein of the Green Party will also be there. All three of them will be participating in a couple of presidential candidate panels, along with 5 members of the Libertarian Party who are candidates for the party's presidential nomination. Cornel West and Jill Stein are by no stretch libertarians, at least as far as I can tell, but they are, like Kennedy, in their campaigns talking about the corporate control over the government. So if the three of them are able to get together and have conversations about this particular issue, and they plus the Libertarian Party somehow can combine forces in that cause, more power to them, or maybe more power to the people would be the way to say it. The Biden campaign, though, is not ignoring the threat that these candidates pose to their electoral prospects. Last Sunday, in Political's magazine section, Jonathan Martin published an article, "Forget No Labels, Biden's Third-Party Peril is on the Left." In it, the author said that he was told the Biden campaign is planning a, quote, multi-pronged offensive against Kennedy, Stein, and West, end quote, some of it from the campaign and some from allies outside the campaign. They want to make the vote an us or them decision, with us meaning Biden, and them meaning, quote, voting for a third party or Trump, end quote. The offensive could include complicating their ballot access, discrediting their motives, or highlighting the, quote, less savory aspects of their character, end quote. If the article is accurate, instead of competing with Biden's challengers based on his competence, policies, and experience, the Biden campaign plans to restrict voter choice by keeping challengers off the ballot wherever possible, and also to smear their character and impugn their motives. So much for the defender of democracy and democratic norms. Just yesterday, the Democratic National Committee filed a complaint with the Federal Elections Commission against the Kennedy campaign and the American Values 2024 PAC, which is helping RFK gather signatures to get on the ballot in several key states. The complaint says, put simply, to qualify for the ballot under state law, American Values must coordinate its activity with Mr. Kennedy and his campaign in a way that violates federal campaign laws. That's exactly the concern I raised several episodes ago, and I emailed both the Kennedy campaign and American Values 2024 to get their response as to how they're going to both work on gathering signatures to get Kennedy on the ballot without directly coordinating their efforts. A super PAC like American Values can accept larger donations than a candidate campaign can, but that's on the condition that it's not working as an arm of the campaign, in effect, by coordinating their efforts with the candidate and his campaign people. In an article in Politico yesterday by Lawrence Ukenye, he quotes Kennedy campaign manager Amaryllis Fox Kennedy in a statement saying, quote, "To my knowledge, we have yet to receive any signatures from American Values PAC or any PAC, nor have we provided any information that is not available to every volunteer and media outlet on our public website," end quote. We'll see how this turns out eventually, but the board of the Federal Elections Commission is composed of equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans, and it's not known for its speedy response time to complaints. While I'm on the subject of RFK, I need to correct an error that I made last week. I was reporting on the recent public opinion polls by Harris, Harvard, and Quinnipiac, and I said that both showed a gain in support for Kennedy from among Republicans, but I misread the numbers in the Quinnipiac poll. My wife pointed this out to me when she watched the show. RFK actually lost 4 percentage points of support from Republicans, according to Quinnipiac, going from 11% in December to 7% in January, not the reverse as I mistakenly read it. I think I was trying to assimilate and explain too many numbers for one show, so I apologize for the error. The Harvard-Harris poll showed Kennedy's support among Republicans going up 4 percentage points from 9% in December to 13% in January. So this is one more area where the two polls diverged in their findings. I still find the discrepancy between the polls hard to explain, as I do think polls can give us valuable insights when they are done properly, which I assume these were. One thing the polls clearly agreed on was that Biden has the lowest favorability rating from among the most prominent presidential candidates at about minus 14 or 15%. But that didn't prevent Biden from winning big in the South Carolina Democratic primary last Saturday. Biden drew 96.21% of the vote, with author Marianne Williamson coming in second with only 2.08%. Congressman Dean Phillips came in behind Williamson with only 1.71%. Phillips appeared on MSNBC's The Weekend on Sunday and congratulated Biden on his convincing win. But he added this caveat.
I mean, who got whooped last night? I did.
Yeah.
My rear end's a little bit sore, and of course I'm congratulating the president. I predicted he would get 95%. He got 96%. I don't know how you could misread that tweet, by the way. I mean, if you look at the numbers, one person, actually two of us got whooped pretty good. It's a mission of principle, and I know tradition dictates that you always protect the incumbent. But I'm a Democrat who wants to win, and yes, he's dominating in the Democratic primary so far. I get it. But look at not the national numbers, as you just referenced. Look at the state numbers. Look at the lowest approval numbers in history. You know that Jimmy Carter was at 58% in January of 1980? Joe Biden's at 38%. You see the battlegrounds, all 7 of them. I'm just trying to wake up our party. We are the progressive party. We should be moving forward. So, I see the writing on the wall. And look at the net. Can I just say the net, though, Simone? Let me just say one thing. Remember how you felt the morning after the election in 2016 versus the morning after the 2008 election? I want to focus on the 2008 election. Let's bring some energy and wake up our party and get young people energized. 4% turnout yesterday in South Carolina. 4%. Yes, it is a whooping. But my goodness, people are apathetic. They are staying home. They don't care. We got to wake people up. I'm trying to inspire a party right now. And a coronation, in my estimation, is the worst way to invite. We need invitation, not confrontation. We're not going to win unless we start opening our hearts and minds to this whole country.
He's right about the low turnout. Turnout for the South Carolina primary was 4.09%, as only 131,870 out of 3,226,353 registered voters actually voted. Is that a small number for a primary? I looked at the 2020 South Carolina presidential primary numbers for comparison. The turnout that year was 16.36%, over 500,000 votes, exactly 4 times higher than this year. There was much more competition for the nomination in 2020, which undoubtedly raised the number of voters turning out. So maybe low voter turnout was due to voters seeing Biden as a shoo-in, and so the race not really as competitive. Or maybe they just weren't enthusiastic about any of the candidates. I suspect it was a little of each of those. 3 days later, Nevada held its Democratic primary. In Nevada, Biden got 89.41% of the vote, a little less than his 96.21% in South Carolina, with strong competition from none of these candidates, which is an option on Nevada's ballot. None of these candidates came in second at 5.58%, with Marianne Williamson in third place at 2.95%. Dean Phillips wasn't on the ballot because he hadn't filed in time for the Nevada deadline. The next day, Williamson suspended her campaign, saying she, quote, could not compete with million-dollar super PAC-funded TV and internet ad campaigns, end quote. I'm pretty sure she meant ads for Biden, as I don't think none of these candidates ran any ads. I calculated the turnout for the Nevada primary at 11%, with 129,088 voters voting out of a total of 1,157,258 voters. That's almost 3 times higher than it was in South Carolina. The option of none of these candidates seems to have made the race more compelling to voters in Nevada as compared to South Carolina. Nevada also held a primary for Republicans that same day. Here, none of the candidates beat Nikki Haley 63.37% to 30.44%. Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot for reasons I'll explain in a minute. According to news reports, the Trump campaign urged voters in the primary to choose none of these candidates as a replacement for voting for Trump. As I explained last week, Trump's supporters in the Nevada Republican State Party decided that they'd rather have a caucus assign delegates for the national convention rather than the state-run primary, because they felt Trump supporters could dominate caucuses easier than they could dominate a primary open to all Republican voters across the state. And they barred any candidate who participated in the primary from also being able to be chosen in the caucuses, which means that Nikki Haley wasn't a choice in the caucus. Of course, Trump won handily with 91.1% of the vote and will collect all 26 of that state's delegates to the Republican National Convention this summer. The other 0.9% of the vote went to Ryan Binkley, who I know absolutely nothing about. Next up is the South Carolina Republican primary and the Michigan Democratic primary, both on February 24th. There's a couple more states between that and Super Tuesday, but Super Tuesday follows closely on March 5th, where 16 states are all going to vote. It's already clear, though, that the major party candidates are going to be Donald Trump and Joe Biden, barring any extraordinary circumstances that would take one or the other of them out of the race, which many voters are probably praying for to happen. Finally, in my last news item, one of these potential circumstances to knock someone off the ballot is the case from Colorado, barring Donald Trump from appearing on its primary ballot. The basis for Colorado's action is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which bars people from holding office if they engaged in insurrection. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments on Thursday for its review of the case and questioned the lawyers for the parties involved. I listened to the entire court session and will give you my brief take on it. You can find plenty of news and commentary on the court session, so I won't go into detail here. But in short, my takeaway is that the question that the justices seemed most interested in was the question of who or which institution has the authority to decide whether or not Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to bar a particular candidate from office. Can a state like Colorado make this decision, or is that power reserved to the United States Congress? Here's an exchange between Justice Clarence Thomas and Trump's attorney, Jonathan Mitchell.
Mr. Mitchell, would you, you didn't spend much time on your argument with respect to whether or not Section 3 is self-executing. So would you address that? And in doing that, your argument is that it's not self-executing, but then in that case, what would the role of the state be? Or is it entirely up to Congress to implement the disqualification in Section 3?
It is entirely up to Congress, Justice Thomas, and our argument goes beyond actually saying that Section 3 is non-self-executing. We need to say something more than that, because a non-self-executing treaty or a non-self-executing constitutional provision normally can still be enforced by a state if it chooses to enact legislation. The holding of Griffin's case goes beyond even that by saying that a state is not allowed to implement or enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment unless and until Congress enacts implementing legislation allowing it to do so. So under Griffin's case, which we believe is correctly decided, the Anderson litigants disagree with us on that point. But if this court were to adhere to the holding of Griffin's case, there would not be any role for the states in enforcing Section 3 unless Congress were to enact a statute that gives them that authority.
And on the other side, here's Anderson's attorney, Jason Murray, followed by questioning from Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
We certainly have a long history in this country of states using their power to determine the manner of selecting presidential electors to enforce other qualifications in the Constitution. I don't take it there's a great debate about whether or not states are allowed to exclude underage or foreign-born candidates, or if President Bush or Obama wanted to run for a third term, that they could be excluded under that broad Article 2 power. I don't see why Section 3 should be treated any differently. Section 3 speaks in the same...
Well, when you look at Section 3, the term insurrection jumps out. And the questions are, what does that mean? How do you define it? Who decides? Who decides whether someone engaged in it? What processes, as Justice Barrett alluded to, what processes are appropriate for figuring out whether someone did engage in that? And that's all of what Chief Justice Chase focused on a year after the 14th Amendment to say, these are difficult questions, and you look right at Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, as the Chief Justice said, and that tells you Congress has the primary role here. I think what's different is the processes, the definition, who decides questions really jump out at you when you look at Section 3. Your response to that?
Well, certainly, Justice Kavanaugh, there has to be some process for determining those questions. And then the question becomes, does anything in the 14th Amendment say that only Congress can create that process? And Section 5 very clearly is not an exclusive provision. It says Congress shall have power.
The justices were interested not only in the legal basis for a determination of who had the authority to decide the question of Trump's exclusion from office, but in the consequences of the decision that they make. I think their decision about this is going to determine the outcome of the case, which raises two interesting possibilities. If they decide that states have the authority to determine that Trump should be excluded from the ballot based on the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment, then eventually different states could make different decisions, and it's going to go back to the courts and fall back in the lap of the Supreme Court, and they'll have to decide which of those is correct. And I think it's going to be hard for them to refute the Colorado case because they did such a thorough job of it. So they're either going to have to bar Trump from the ballot across all the states, or they would have to, decide what one of the other states made the correct decision for some other grounds why Trump should be included. On the other hand, the other possibility is that they decide that Congress is the only one that has the authority to make this determination. And then we could have a situation where Trump wins enough of the popular vote in enough states to get a majority in the Electoral College. But then when it comes time to count the electoral votes, we might have a majority of Democrats in both houses of the Congress before they actually start counting the electoral votes. And they could decide to exclude Trump from that count, or who knows what. So this is not going to be over by a long shot. We could have some exciting things happening on next January 6th. Once again, some historically groundbreaking events. Well, that's about enough for this week's show on the upcoming presidential elections. Thanks again for watching. If you like the show, please hit the like button. And if you're not already subscribed, do subscribe. You can also find this show, the video version on Rumble, and the audio version on a number of streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you care to help support this show financially, you can give a donation. Any donation is not too small, and I'll put a link to a PayPal payment service, which is secure, and you can also use a credit or debit card at the end of the program description below this video. That's it again. So thanks, goodbye, and hope to see you next week.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.